Travis Wayne Goodsell. Appears I have some time to kill. So I'll teach you how to research church history. Now, it would be great if all the evidence could just be given to us and we were told the truth about what actually happened in the beginning of the church. Unfortunately, the church has confessed to lying and covering up church history, giving post excuses for not being faith promoting, and then you've got to wonder, why is the church history not faith promoting? But they now claim they're telling us the truth, yet they're still not. Because when you do actual research, you find out that they're still lying. And so for Mormons, I would assume you're like me. I was born and raised Mormon. I wanted to know church history. When I'm hearing all this talk about stuff that I'm not hearing from seminary, church, conference, institute, etc. So what is the truth? So it becomes kind of essential. And for ex-Mormons, well, the church confessed to lying and then came out with an alternate story, and you believe that alternate story, and that offended you and you left. Whether it's Joseph Smith raping little children, his inability to translate, looking at rocks in a hat, whatever the new story is that is disturbing, to say the least. So I would think, well, I don't know. You got to understand, the church lied to us. And so why are we now going to believe their horrible, insidious claims now? Because Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball were not part of the origin of the church. So why are we believing them? So anyway, how to research. When you're dealing with a historical subject matter, you have a time frame with what you're working with. You can't go all the way back to the origins of history, or the origins of man, the origins of the universe, Earth, unless that is your particular study that you're working on. So when we're dealing with the church, we have to set a point to start. That's the first thing you need to decide. For me, I chose Joseph Smith Sr. as the starting point. And when he had married Lucy Mack, and they're in Vermont, that's where I started. And so this is all hindsight, because I should have done it then. But I didn't realize I was going to need to. I thought the answers would be available a lot easier than they turned out to be. And so for you guys, I'm giving you my wisdom as to how to do it right from the beginning. So it would be ideal to have a sheet of paper or a word program for each person that you're going to research, and have a date, event, and place. You probably should also have connections. And then thus for person, place, event, and date. So, person, date, event, place, and then connections of persons, dates, events, places. Got that? Like I said in the beginning, it would be great if we had evidence that would explain everything for us. We don't. But we do have some. Linguistic science, for example, has identified Sidney Rigdon as the major author of the Book of Mormon. That should have its own category of known evidences. And so if you want to start with Sidney Rigdon, you'd have the person, Sidney Rigdon. You'd have the dates. That would be what you find through his life, starting with his birth and events that you find through his life, putting the dates and the events and the places where those events took place at the date specified. And so let's show you how this would work. Joseph Smith Sr. is where I started. And so there's the Wikipedia page, Joseph Smith Sr. Now you've got to be able to distinguish between a fact and your own spiritual witness of what you want to be true. Because by saying Sidney Rigdon is the author of the Book of Mormon, you're all of a sudden freaking out if you're Mormon. You may be even confused if you didn't hear that Sidney Rigdon is the author of the Book of Mormon and you're an ex-Mormon, or not a Mormon at all. Because there are many of you who still believe Joseph Smith wrote the Bible, or the Book of Mormon, or looked at Rocks and Hats and dictated it to Martin Harris, and then later Oliver Cowdery to finish it up. That is not confirmable. That Joseph Smith Jr. and Martin Harris are connections with the particular dates for starting the Book of Mormon, with the event being the Book of Mormon beginning and the place. But there are other situations, like the evidence, that Sidney Rigdon's the author. And so Joseph Smith being the author has to be set aside. We cannot confirm that because the evidence suggests otherwise. And I know that's devastating for someone who has a conversion story that Joseph Smith is the author of the Book of Mormon, having translated by the gift and power of God. You are now going through a faith crisis. I did that video yesterday or the day before. It's our false conversions that lead to our faith crisis because we got deceived. You need to stick to the truth to avoid a faith crisis. And unfortunately, the prophets confessed to lying, and they're still lying to us today, purposely causing faith crises among Mormons, if Mormons aren't gullible enough to continue to believe their spiritual witnesses, not produce the physical reality of them, which is what the Book of Mormon tells us we're supposed to do with a spiritual witness. And so, for Joseph Smith Sr., we have his birth, July 12th, 1771. I told you I waited until he was married. But if this is what you're going to do, then yeah. And it's important because people make claims throughout history about other people. And so having all this written down, you can then see, wait a minute, we have a contrary clashing of something, whether it's a date, a person, event, or a place. Somebody's lying. So then you have to figure out, okay, who is it that's lying to us? And with this, I will show you who is lying to us. He's father of Joseph Smith Jr., founder of Latter-day Saint movement, and I'm surprised nobody has changed that, because Jesus is mad calling it the Latter-day Saint movement. Nicknames are of the devil. Senior was one of the 8 witnesses of the Book of Mormon, and so that is important. But we're going to deal with this part down here in the last sentence of the first opening paragraph. Joseph Senior was also a Freemason in Ontario Lodge number 23 of Canandaigua, New York. Now it says citation is needed. Shame on whoever did not put the citation in. There is a citation. This is confirmed, but he was not a member in the Ontario Lodge. Down here in is it early life? Yeah. Under early life, it says he was raised to the degree of Master Mason on May 7th, 1818 in Ontario Lodge, number 23 of Canandaigua, New York. And he says, and it says citation needed. No. It put the citation in. It's legitimate. But yeah, because they didn't, you're now going to have to find that citation. And you can go to Freemasonry, they tell you, people have published books of the list of those who were in the different lodges, and it's alphabetical order, so you can go down to Smith, and you see Smith Sr. raised, confirming that. That's why they knew such details. So I'm kind of disappointed that they didn't put the citation in there, because it's established fact. So 1818, 7th of May is the date for Joseph Smith Sr. The event, Master Mason. And the place, Canandaigua, New York. So yes, you're going to have to look on a map to see where Canandaigua, New York is. And you're going to find out that it's south of Manchester and Palmyra. It's on that road going down. And so you need to pay attention to the distance away. And you're going to have to say to yourself, okay, well, I guess did he take the family van or the sports wagon? You can't impose anachronisms on history either. You have to know what was available. And so, horse. Because if he was the Master Mason down there, he would need a horse in order to conduct meetings. Otherwise, he'd have to walk for quite a while in order to get there, and then he'd have to stay there. So yeah, he had the car. And that's also helpful when you're trying to figure out Hiram Smith, because Hiram Smith was in the Palmyra Lodge. It's within walking distance. So yes, that's why Hiram was there. And yet Joseph was not listed as a Freemason. So again, you can see how broad of a research we have to do. And so I'm just sticking with this first basic thing to help you through this. And so, to look for confirmation, you might stumble across Mormonism and Freemasonry. And in one of these paragraphs, it says, the Joseph Smith family was a Masonic family which lived by and practiced the estimable and admirable tenets of Freemasonry. The father, Joseph Smith Sr., was a documented member, that presupposes there's evidence, in upstate New York. He was raised to the degree of Master Mason on May 7th, 1818 in Ontario Lodge number 23 of Canandaigua, New York. An older son, Hiram Smith, was a member of Mount Moriah Lodge number 112, Palmyra, New York. And this is a quote from Terry Chatier in his book Freemasonry and the Church of Latter-day Saints. And there's a 3 reference here, but then they ask for a better source needed. Again, why are you quoting an author rather than going to the document itself? And so you also find at the beginning of this article, under historical connections, it says a significant number of leaders in the early Latter-day Saint movement were Masons prior to their involvement in the movement. Notable examples include Heber C. Kimball, John C. Bennett, Hiram Smith, and Joseph Smith Sr. Well, okay, now we've got a connection of events with Freemasonry. These 3 other persons, Heber, John, and Hiram, were involved in Freemasonry. And so there's a connection there prior to the starting of the church. And so let's start with the first one, Heber C. Kimball. And under the section under Masonry, it says, in 1923. That should already ring a whole bunch of bells for Mormons. When did Joseph see Nephi? Because you know it wasn't Moroni, right? 1823. This was when Alvin also died. Joseph Smith was told by Nephi to come back that same date every year in September to be instructed on how to translate the Book of Mormon. The plates, the gold plates. So, yeah, that should already ring bells, and you can see all the different connections that are already tying in. This is before Kimball is a member. This is before the church is even organized. Kimball received the 3 craft degrees of Freemasonry. Do you understand what 3 craft degrees are? So yeah, you're now going to have to study Freemasonry. And understand that he's claiming he's a Master Mason in 1 year. When you understand Smith Sr. became a Master Mason in 1818, he wasn't a member then, we have to then say, okay, well, when did Smith Sr. become a Master Mason? And there is no document for that. However, there's a birth certificate of Hiram Smith. It's not spelled with a Y and a U. It's spelled with an I and an A. He was born 1800, wasn't it? Yep, February 9th, 1800. And when you learn about Freemasonry, you learn about Hiram Abiff. Alvin is an elf from the Druids of England. Alvin's the older brother who died in 1823. And so how did they go from Elven Druid into Hiram of Freemasonry? Huh. When you understand Freemasonry, that'll be explained to you, but that's not what we're connecting here. He claims that he was raised up in 1 year to a Master Mason in the lodge at Victor Flats. And it's just so unfortunate that there's no link to it. And when you realize which lodges were which Freemasonry, because there were two main ones, York Rites and Scottish Rites. And they're different. Scottish Rites are 33-degree Masons. York Rites are Knights Templar. Oh, Knights Templar, Holy Grail, Bloodline of Christ, Egyptian treasure plates buried in the earth. Yeah. Ontario County, New York. And here we go. Here's the connection. Here's another connection. In 1824, the very next year, the first year when Joseph Smith Jr. went and talked to Nephi about how to translate the plates, he sent a petition to the chapter at Canandaigua, New York. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Where's Joseph Smith Sr. listed here? He's the Master Mason. The petition would have come to Joseph Smith Sr. as the Master Mason. Yeah, we're about to find out who the liar in the story is. To receive the York Rites. And again, when you understand that Victor Flats is in Scottish Rites territory, degrees of Royal Ark Masonry. He's skipping from number 3 in the York Rites to number 7. Wow. Skipping all those ones in between, huh? And he says his petition was accepted. Although, as he reported, and he reported? Yeah. He wrote it in his journal here in Salt Lake. And he failed to mention he had met Joseph Smith Sr.? What? You now know him. It's not something he would have written in his journal in 1823 because we have the document. He wrote it here in Salt Lake. This was reminiscing back on his life. There are some major errors of concern here. And he doesn't know Joseph Smith Sr.? Seriously? Smith Sr. died in 1840. Plenty of time for Heber to know him, especially since Sr. was the patriarch of the church and would give Heber his patriarchal blessing. Huh. He says the anti-Masons had burned down the chapter building in Canandaigua. It's documented. We have the documents. Oops. Busted. So let's find out what this anti-Mason thing is all about. Under anti-Masonry, for Wikipedia, we have, under political anti-Masonry, American political anti-Masonry, 1830s to 1850s. So it begins in 1826. 1830s to 1850s? 1826. Anyway, William Morgan disappeared from the small town of Batavia, New York, and was presumed murdered after threatening to expose Freemasonry's secrets by publishing its rituals. Everybody knew the rituals. That was not his book. That was the Batavian Press. As you keep reading here, David Miller was the owner of the press. He was contracted to work on 2 books. And with his disappearance, the Batavian Press needed to make up their money, and so David Miller then published the book as where we get our knowledge of the 3 different degrees up to a Master Mason. And so the book is helpful in that it lets us know the role of a Master Mason, of whom Joseph Smith Sr. was. But how is William Morgan connected to all this? Because now we find him attached to the anti-Masonry in 1826. This was the year before Joseph got the plates, the Egyptian treasure plates buried in the ground. If you're not catching on, this is why you need to do your whole thing written out, because then you'd be putting checks for, oh, Egyptian treasure plates, Knights Templar, Joseph Smith Jr. So now we got to figure out who this William Morgan is. Because apparently he was in Batavia, New York, when he disappeared. Under disappearance of William Morgan, anti-Mason, it says in the first paragraph, Morgan was jailed in Canandaigua. I thought it was Batavia. And when Miller learned of this, he went to the jail. So David Miller, Batavia, William Morgan, Canandaigua, goes to the jail. Canandaigua. Who's the Master Mason of Canandaigua Lodge? What is his role as a Master Mason? He went to the jail to pay the debt and secure Morgan's release. Morgan was released, but then rearrested and charged with supposedly failing to pay a $2 tavern bill. $2! I want my $2! Anybody remember that movie from the 80s? John Cusack. And so we see that they didn't want him to publish the book, but who are they? But that's the bigger story, and I've already given you clues here. And so this is how you do research in the original church history, the real church history, is because there's a lot of lies out here, as I've demonstrated. And you have to be able to figure out and identify the lies and get to the real truth. And the real truth will help answer what the church is failing to tell us. Now, why wouldn't the church tell us that what Heber is claiming is wrong? Heber, the one who was the first counselor of Brigham Young. So, alrighty. that for that. So again, just to rehash for you, have a single paper for each person. Have all the dates, events, and places that they're involved with. And then have a connections section for which person, which date, which event, which place. So for this example, you'd have on the first paper, Joseph Smith Sr., the date 1826. The event, disappearance of William Morgan. The place, Canandaigua, New York. Connections, Heber C. Kimball. Notice that Heber C. Kimball says that he's going to get the Royal Ark degree, skipping from 3 to number 7. What rank did Morgan receive? In 1825, Morgan received the Royal Ark degree at Leroy's Western Star, chapter number 33. Having declared under oath that he had previously received the 6 degrees that preceded it. He didn't skip. Heber is trying to skip and claim he skipped. And so, yes, William Morgan also is a connection, as you'd have a page for Heber C. Kimball and a page for William Morgan. William Morgan is now a part of church history. And so, yes, it's not just the part of, where is it? There's something about connections to the church. Where is it? Oh, here we go. Under Aftermath, the anti-Masonic movement, and the paragraph starting, members of Freemasonry criticized the Mormons for their adoption of Masonic rituals and regalia. In 1830, Morgan's widow, Lucinda Pendleton Morgan, married George W. Harris of Batavia, a silversmith who was 20 years older. After they moved to the Midwest, they became Mormons. By 1837, some historians believe, don't put beliefs, she became one of the plural wives of Joseph. See, they had to throw that in there. There is no confirmation, no documentation, they just threw it in there. She continued to live with George Harris. They were actually right across the street in Nauvoo from each other. After Smith was murdered in 1844, she was sealed to him. Oh, by who? The sealing keys were taken from the earth because Joseph didn't pass them to anybody, and nobody followed section 107, verse 22. Who was the one who sealed them? See, again, put the pieces of the puzzle together. And so, yeah, oh, wait a minute. In 1841, the Mormons announced their vicarious baptism of William Morgan after his death. As one of the first under the new rite, there were 8 baptized on that first baptism for the dead in 1841. But that's not going back to this. They're not making the connections to Smith Sr. They're leaving that out. You have to follow the trail to search and find this out. That's what I had to do. They're not going to tell you. The church is doing all they can to keep that from you. So, there you go. Basics on how to study the real church history and do research on it.